Before I start, by the way, is there anyone who has a word of praise or testimony or anything you want to share? You're all ready for the sermon, right? But please, even after the service, share with each other if God has given you a blessing or you have a prayer request, a deep need. Please share that with someone so that we can pray. Now, this morning I want to talk about God's perfect plan, but before I do that, I wasn't going to talk about this, but this morning I went on my email. I went to my email account, and I had an email from my brother. I have an adopted brother. He's about 10 years younger than me. And he sent me this interesting email. He said that he found some emails from our father from a few years ago, and he sent me a copy of the email, and he was saying he was really sort of encouraged by my father, the email, and remembered my father. And my father died in like 2001, like the same, right after 9/11, I guess. And anyway, it was very interesting. It was kind of convicting to me because the email was about the fact that right before my father died, he went to Russia with a group of people, to Moscow, Russia, with a kind of a mission group. And they were actually supporting a children's camp, a Christian children's camp in Russia. But also, my father had been sort of an alcoholic. My father had problems with drinking and smoking. But I think it was partly that he was so responsible. He was an electrical engineer and worked for some different companies. And he was such a responsible guy and such a focused guy, and he was really good with money, and he really was responsible for our family. And it caused him a lot of stress. Maybe my sister and I, our family, caused him stress. Maybe he was drinking because of me. No. But and I laugh, but there's some truth to that. My sister and I were kind of selfish kids when we were kids, and my parents actually did a pretty good job of trying to discipline us and guide us. But my father quit drinking. He quit drinking alcohol, I can't remember, a few years back, before he died. And he got involved with Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not a Christian group, but it's based on Christian principles. And there are Christian groups for alcoholics, right? And anyway, when he went to Russia, he took a bunch of books with him. And this was not the purpose of their trip. The purpose of their trip was to work with kids in a camp and give them money. They actually took thousands of dollars, over $1,000 in cash and gave it to the ministry because that's the best way. But he was with some people from the church, and then he made this effort without knowing any Russian, or very little Russian. He made this effort to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in Moscow, Russia, to deliver these books so that people could be helped to get off of alcohol or drugs and come to know God. So and then he died, after that, maybe a few months after that. But I felt kind of convicted, I would not be here speaking or helping over at Handong without my parents who guided me with their own Christian faith. And even though we had some, disagreements and problems, because we're all sinners, right? I need to appreciate them, and I do appreciate them. And you might want to think about how people have affected you so that you are here. And the reason we've been affected by mothers, fathers, grandmothers, coaches, teachers, professors, pastors, and just other people in our lives, relatives, brothers and sisters, is because God worked in their lives. And then we're going to talk about God's plan, okay? And I've been trying to talk about things about leading up to Easter, about Christ's death and resurrection. So we're in Matthew, and I want to talk about next one. Let's go to the next one. Slide. Okay, so we went through the scriptures, but I found this very interesting. I've been looking at how Jesus was talking about himself during his life. And I've been looking at the prophecies in the Old Testament. And I think we just need to review and realize that God had a plan before the foundation of the world, that he would come in Jesus and that he would die for our sins and he would be raised again. And he knew that. He knew that. So we see here, Jesus said to them, we're going to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law, the Jewish leaders. Next one. And he will be turned over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified for our sins. And then, the really positive note in the exclamation point. On the third day, he will be raised to life. And that's why we celebrate this every Sunday, but especially we celebrate on Easter, right? So I want to talk about the prophecies and some things about that. And I want to say this. We all have plans, right? We all have plans. How many people have plans? You make plans. You make plans for school. Go to Hills, right? You come from Cambodia, go to Hills, right? You make plans to go to Handong. You make plans in your high school. Your family makes plans for having children and babies. My parents had some natural kids. They had a plan to adopt a brother, my brother and their son. Very interesting. But we often our plans fail or they don't come out exactly right. How many people have planned something and it failed? You planned something and it failed. Now sometimes they succeed, right? But our plans often fail. But God's plans, and this is probably the main point I want to make, God's plans never fail. And he's always got this perfect plan. He's always had this perfect plan. And even though we sinned, his perfect plan was to do all this for us. And last week we actually talked about, because he died for us, then we have much more and lots of things that we can have from him. But we're going to go back and talk about the plan. Okay, so next one. All right, so if you look at the last week, we'll just review quickly. He gives us a lot of things because even before we were enemies, he died for us and he planned that. And then, or even when we were enemies, and then now that we're not enemies, when we receive Jesus and his forgiveness, we are not his enemy anymore. Now, if you haven't received Jesus, you are still, in a sense, God's enemy. So I hope if you don't know God and you haven't come to believe in him, you need to come to believe in him because you're still his enemy. Actually, Jesus would say, I'm not your enemy, but you need to accept my forgiveness and love, right? So he gives us power for life. He gives us a position with Christ, like we're co-heirs. And we didn't really talk about this part, but we'll mention it. He gives us his personality and his character. So 3 P's: power, position, the person of Christ, and his personality. Okay, next one. We'll just complete what I said last week. The person of Christ. He gives us a counselor, which is also God. He gives us his counselor. He gives us his spirit, and he leads us as the Spirit of truth. And we can have his personality and his mind and his guidance. Okay, next one. And Jesus said, the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide us into all truth. And at the bottom it says, he will take from God and from Jesus and make it known to us. So we should be able to know God's plans, or some of God's plans. All right, next one. The Bible also says, for who has known the mind of the Lord, that we may instruct him, but we have the mind of Christ. Paul said that we can have the mind of Christ. So if you're wondering, oh, I don't know, I'm not too smart, or I'm not as smart as a Hill student, I'm not a law student, or whatever. You can have the mind of Christ. We can have the mind of Christ because he died for us. And then, of course, we're supposed to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and strength. God gives us the power to do that and the opportunity to do that. Okay, next. And these are just some of the qualities. These are just a few of the qualities. But before Jesus died, he had compassion on people. Right up until the time he died, he healed people. Okay. He had perseverance. He kept going even though it was tough. He had discipline. He would go and follow God's plan no matter what, and he would pray and in the desert and so forth. He also had joy and peace. He had obedience to God and faith that God was going to raise him from the dead, and then he would come back to life. And we also, many of us know, that the Bible says we have the fruit of his Spirit. Do you know the fruits of the Spirit? We talked about this a few months ago. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And we have humility, and we have forgiveness, and other fruits too. But now probably you know those in Korean, right? Okay, next one. So this is just a summary. We also have, like I said, the position and personality of Christ. We are seated with Christ, it says here. God raised us up and seated us with him. So some people say we need to make sure in our minds that we know we are seated with Christ. Have that confidence, right? And then it says, in the coming ages, God will show his incomparable riches of his grace. But why do we get that grace? We get that grace because God had a plan. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, so this week we'll talk about God's perfect plan. I don't know if we'll finish, but God's perfect plan. He knew that he was going to die, and he knew that he was going to be raised from the dead. He knew that he was going to suffer. That was God's plan. And he followed God's plan. He did not deviate from God's plan. Okay. And then he was crucified by Jews and Gentiles, and basically, technically, all of us crucified God, right? And he was raised to life. Fantastic. Okay, praise the Lord. Let's go to the next one. Okay, we all make plans. As I said, we all make plans. But we make plans and sometimes they fail. Now, this is a phrase that I heard recently. Plan your work and work your plan. But if you don't work your plan, you plan to fail. Sometimes, I know I have plans. I go, I'm going to do this. And then I procrastinate, and I postpone, and I don't do it, and then I actually fail to do what I was going to do, right? God never does that. That amazes me. The more I think about it, God always keeps his promises. He always follows his plans, right? God made perfect plans, and he keeps his promises. Okay, next. So let's look at some of the verses. Paul, the Apostle Paul in Acts would go and he would reason with the Jewish people in the synagogues or the kind of the churches of those days. And he would say, look, it says in the Old Testament, the Messiah would be this, or this would happen. And hundreds of years before Jesus came, God had this plan and he spoke to the prophets. So let's look at this one. Let's read this together. Now this one, actually we don't need to read all of this, but God said when the serpent deceived Adam and Eve sinned, in Genesis way back there it says, because you have done this, you are cursed, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. And here, hers is really seed, or singular, meaning the Messiah. One person in the future through people, through all the people came from Adam and Eve and Noah and so forth. And the Messiah will crush the serpent's head, defeat Satan, defeat evil, defeat death. But it does say also that the serpent or Satan will crush the heel or hurt the heel, bruise the heel, just bruise the heel of God, so he will suffer. But the suffering of the devil is much more than the suffering that Jesus went through. Jesus died so that he would defeat death. He could defeat death, defeat sin, and free us, right? And that was way back in Genesis. God said that was his plan. He knew that. Okay, next one. Okay? And then he talked to Abraham and he said, leave your country and your people and your father's household and go to a land I will show you. And I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. And I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Now, it doesn't specifically say here, talk about Jesus or the Messiah, but basically, we know that the Messiah came through Abraham's people and Abraham's line, and that God was talking about the fact that he would bless Abraham with lots of spiritual children. Not just physical children, but spiritual children. And all of us are like descendants of Abraham, right? Lots of people are descendants of Abraham physically, but also spiritually, because he was a man of faith, and then God used him and took him to the promised land, and then through these people, the Messiah came, right? It was all part of God's plan. So we're here because of that. Okay, next one. Another one. God spoke through Moses. Moses said, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own brothers. You must listen to him." And many people say this is a prophecy about the Messiah. And Jesus was more than a prophet, but God will raise up a prophet, and we must listen to him, right? Okay, next one. David prophesied about Jesus. Now, I won't go through all of these specifically, but in many Psalms, there were specific things about the Messiah many, many years before Jesus was born. And people don't realize, sometimes I think people don't realize how incredibly amazing that is, that there's a book with all these prophecies, like over 300. Psalm 2, the Messiah will be the Son of God. Okay. Psalm 16, and by the way, when it says Son of God, it means with the same essence and eternal being as God himself, therefore God. Not just a father-son human idea, right? Psalm 16, the Messiah will be raised from death. Psalm 22 has approximately 11 prophecies. He will be sneered at and mocked and crucified. David said that centuries before. Okay, next one. Psalm 22, he will be pierced in his hands and his feet. Amazing. God told the prophets, told David, and they spoke it, right? His bones will not be broken. And it's very interesting. Usually when the Romans crucified someone, at some point they would break your legs and it would cause death. And it was very painful. It would cause death so that they could sort of speed up the process. But it said Jesus died, and they came to Jesus, and he was already dead, and they did not break his legs, and it fulfilled that prophecy. Okay? It said men will gamble for his clothing. And we see in the Gospels they divided his clothing, and then they cast lots for the one-piece undergarment. He had some kind of really nice one-piece undergarment that was sewn without any seams. It was really nice, and they cast lots, or they gambled for that. He was accused. He would be accused by false witnesses and hated without a cause. God already knew this and planned this. He will be betrayed by a friend, Psalm 41. He would ascend into heaven. Okay, next one. Next. Isaiah has lots of prophecies. He will be born of a virgin. Even the Quran says Jesus, the Messiah, would be born of a virgin. His first work would be in Galilee. The Messiah would heal people. He will be beaten, mocked, and spat upon. Isaiah 53, this is one that's fairly common. There's several things in Isaiah 53 about the suffering servant. He will be rejected. He will be silent before his accusers. He will be killed with criminals and buried with the rich. So he was buried in a stone tomb. That Joseph of Arimathea was a rich man, or he had a really nice tomb in the rock, which was uncommon maybe for criminals, and they put him in there. And that was actually God's plan to make sure that he was sealed in there with the Roman guards, so nobody could say the body was stolen, even though they tried to say that. That's a clue that it really happened, right? Because those Roman soldiers could just be killed by Caesar if they didn't do their job, right? So they really had to watch. Okay, next one. Micah 5:2, we will be born in Bethlehem. So that's more of a Christmas prophecy, but it's still a prophecy about the Messiah. He will enter Jerusalem riding on a donkey. And maybe next week we'll talk about that, but we have Palm Sunday where we talk about Jesus entered into Jerusalem before he died. And it says in Zechariah, long before, he prophesied that. He will be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. That's in the Old Testament. He will be forsaken by his disciples. And in Malachi, he will enter the temple with authority, which he did. Right? Okay, next one. Jesus knew the plan, and he went to his death. Okay, now, here are just some other scriptures. Matthew 12:39. A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. So it's interesting.